So I was the person on the other side of things who was reading applications and deciding who was getting in. And I can tell you that when I read students' applications, and I would often come across Asian students with strong curriculum, perfect scores, perfect grades, doing lots of good extracurricular activities, and writing quite similarly generic essays. And it was hard to distinguish between students and decide which student or students to admit at any given time. So I'll talk today very honestly about ways in which you can make yourself stand out in a way that's honest and authentic, because that's a big part of it too, is making sure, and Clara alluded to this actually, is really, it is speaking from the heart, sometimes not too honestly, because you can go in the other direction. And I was editing an essay this morning from an Asian student actually, coincidentally, that went sort of in the other direction of being too honest and being inappropriately honest in a college admissions essay. But in any case, there's a way to do it, and that's the good news, and I'll talk about it amongst other things today. First of all, let me see, by a show of hands, how many students in this room play an instrument? Okay. And how many students are interested in math and science or have done things in math and science outside of school? Okay. So if everybody's being honest, there's actually not that much of the sort of homogeneousness in this room. My guess is that people are not being completely honest and everyone is not raising their hand. Or that we have a lot of parents in the room. But anyway, those are two things that are kind of very common amongst Asian applicants. Playing instruments and at a high level, and an interest in math, science, or the pre-professions. And I'm going to talk about, that falls into two different categories. I'm going to talk about the academic piece, also the extracurricular piece, and break those down into a couple of different things. So the academic piece is the courses that you take, as well as the grades that you earn. And I'll get to standardized testing in a couple of minutes. But your grades are very important, but it's always in the context of the classes that you take. So if your school offers AP level courses and you've taken none of them but have straight A's, that's not considered the most rigorous curriculum, and we would say that that's not necessarily the strongest academic background for sure. You'll find yourself in a difficult spot to get admitted to higher level schools if you haven't taken the most rigorous curriculum. Now, one thing I want to talk about is that students from one school are not compared to students at other schools. So if you go to a public school in New Jersey, you're not being compared to students at another public school in New Jersey, or to private school kids in New Jersey or New York. You're really just looked at yourself in the context of your high school. So how much or how well have you taken advantage of what your high school has to offer? So if you happen to attend a high school that doesn't offer AP courses, you're not going to be penalized in the process either. So assuming that your school does offer AP or IB level courses, which most do in this area, the expectation for schools, and the higher up you get, the more so, is that you're going to be taking those classes. It's also the case that the expectation is that you're going to be taking all 5 core academic classes through 12th grade, regardless of your interests. So if you are interested and you know that you want to be a doctor, and you're even going to apply to accelerated or combined pre-med programs directly out of high school for college, you still should be taking not only math and science and then English, which is almost always required, but also history and also foreign language through your 12th grade year. Foreign language there's a little bit more flexibility on, but the others not so much. You want to at least take 3 years of foreign language, and not the language that would be spoken at home. So you wouldn't want to, if Korean is spoken at home, we wouldn't say Korean is the foreign language for you, even though it would be for me or for somebody else. And so you want to make sure that you're taking a broad-based, what we would consider liberal arts preparation, and doing well in ideally all of the classes, or as well as can be expected. Everybody has strengths and everyone has weaknesses, and even amongst Asian applicants, not everybody is performing perfectly on everything, and that's obviously okay. And that's one thing I also want to speak to, which is a lot of students will come to me with actually very strong backgrounds and sometimes more modest backgrounds who are Asian, and be very nervous that because so many Asian students will present sort of perfectly, that they really have no chance at anything. And don't be too hard on yourself there either. If you have 750 or higher on pretty much any section of any test that is offered by the College Board, you're in good shape. It's a good thing. Don't be so hard on yourself and think that you've done poorly. Let's just say you're in the 600s, and maybe some people in the 500s certain things. There are also schools that will take you as well, and that would go whether you are Asian or not. But I have a lot of students who will come to me who do not necessarily present as perfectly, at least from the numbers perspective, and they fear that really they'll have no good name brand or solid option, and that really isn't the case. And so it's really, really important to work as hard as you can and to challenge yourself as much as you can, but of course know that it's not perfection that we're striving for. And I often will sometimes tell students of mine who can get the perfect scores and everything, actually to try and not do it, because it looks so robotic when you do. And I've had students be a little bit nervous about that. They want to go in and retake something to get the 800 when they're at 760 or 770, and I'm telling them not to, as their college counselor, saying, no, don't do it. We don't want you to look perfect. We don't want you to look robotic in that way. And students have had a little bit of difficulty, but they're at Princeton, they're at Stanford, they're at Harvard, they're at Yale, they're at Columbia now, and they'll tell you that it worked. And I'm not saying go in and always don't try to do well, but it's not perfection again that we're going for. You're trying to show that you can do work at a particular level, and there's a little bit of a range there. So what we consider to be the highest level is not necessarily just that top point of perfection. So you want to take the most rigorous courses available at your high school that you can also handle and still do well in. You want to do well in them, as I said, get ideally as close to all A's as possible, more A's than B's, let's say, at least in the core classes. And let's turn our attention to standardized tests, which is something that for Asian applicants often is, at least they'll say to me, that's sort of the easy part for them, that they just study, they can do it, and take care of it. It is important to do well, and tests can be a big determining factor in college admissions, but it tends to more be that for tests, what we're looking for is just that they're not an issue. High scores are not going to get you in anywhere that you really want to go, and sometimes don't get you in, period. But low scores, or relatively low scores for a particular school, can certainly keep you out, regardless of what other things look like. And admissions officers don't tend to say that, but I can tell you as a former admissions officer that I didn't tell people that, even though I knew it to be true. And I can also tell you that I see students go through this process year after year after year, and it will time and time again, it will prove to be the case that there is a certain point for certain schools, and it can differ depending what school you're looking at, where the scores will just knock you out, unfortunately. And I don't make the rules, as I say. I just kind of help students kind of figure out how to navigate through. So again, with the scores, we're just looking for them to be in a range where we say, okay, good, they're not an issue. We could never say anything better than that. Even if they were perfect or close to perfect, I would say, okay, we're shooting for the highest level, your scores aren't an issue, and we move on. So again, that's why you don't have to be as sort of restrictive on yourself when it comes to, that upper range of, like I said, certainly 750 or higher, but ideally in the 700s or higher if we were looking at the more selective schools. After the grades and the courses and the test scores, then we look to things like extracurricular activities. Extracurricular activities, a lot of students and a lot of parents will ask me, is it better to do this than it is to do that? They'll ask me, I want to do this, but I know it doesn't look very good. Or they say, I'm doing this because I know colleges like it. Or it's more serious, and so they'll take me more seriously. And the truth is, colleges are looking for all different kinds of people. They need poets, they need athletes, they need musicians, they need academic decathlon people who are going to join debate, they need really all walks of life to populate and to get involved in all the different activities they have on campus. You'll see that they always boast that they have 50, 60, 150, 160 different campus groups extracurricularly, and that's because they want people to get involved in different things. So it's not the case that playing an instrument is any better than drawing, you know, and having a good, beautiful portfolio and pursuing your passion in the arts. It's not better to volunteer at an elderly home than it is to jam with the band every week. Do what you enjoy, truly do what you enjoy, and ideally take it to the highest level possible. And sometimes there are things that exist sort of out in the world that help determine what level you're at. So if you're in science research, there are programs over the summer that are known to be more selective and that are known by the colleges to be kind of almost like a weeding out process even at the start, so they're really, really taken seriously and they're substantive. And then there are other things that you might do where there's not all that much out there that can distinguish you in one way or another. But you will find that there's almost something for everything. And you can always do things at a higher level, or you can always do things kind of with more leadership, or make it bigger, make it different than something that already exists. And those are the kinds of things that I talk about with students, is how to sort of take their interest and translate it into something that makes sense for colleges in terms of extracurricular activities, but also is something that they can pursue and continue with to a level that makes sense for wherever they're shooting for. And the expectations from an Ivy League school, for instance, versus a place that might be a little bit more reasonable to get into, but is still highly selective, is quite different on the extracurricular front. And so there's something called, we call it standard strong. There are standard strong recommendations, there are standard strong extracurriculars, and those are the things that we sort of expect that you're going to be doing if you're a serious student applying to a selective school, but they're not anything that's pretty exceptional. And if you're shooting for the highest level, we need, just like we need the academics and other things to be exceptional, we need the extracurricular piece to be exceptional too. And that goes beyond, you know, being first chair in an orchestra or being student body president or things like that, which are important and definitely make a difference, but are not where we kind of want to top out ideally. And so there are ways that you can identify things that already exist, and there are ways that you can create things when they don't. And those are all things that are important. One of the things I want to talk about, which is really, really important, and Clara referred to it when she was speaking, is the essay. How many 12th graders do we have in here, by the way? Just show of hands. And then what about 11th graders? And 10th graders? And then 9th graders. Okay, so it's an even mix, but a lot of 11th and 12th graders for sure. So for those of you who are in 12th grade, hopefully you've started a little bit on your essay. For those of you in 11th grade, don't think about it until next year. I encourage you not to think about it, actually. But the most important thing about the essay, just like the rest of it, but it's crucial in the essay, is that you really write about something that's important to you. We generally do not want to write about academic interests or like really your resume or things relating to it in your main essay, unless there is something in your resume, let's say, that really is just such a part of you that you couldn't really talk about yourself without mentioning it, essentially. A lot of times when students are writing and brainstorming for essay topics, and then we finish and either they or their parents will see it, if the parents do see the essay, people will often react and say, oh, it's a lot more casual than I thought, or it doesn't sound as smart as I thought it needed to sound. And every year I'll read sample essays to my students from students the year prior, just to give them a sense of what a good college essay that works, looks like. And I read people from all different levels, but I always ask at the end, where do you think the student ended up? Like, you don't have to guess exactly, but kind of the kind of school that this person would end up. And one of my favorite examples is when I read an essay that I really liked. I had somebody the other day say, I don't know, and I don't want to say the school almost because it's not fair to the school, but they said, maybe like a Connecticut college, I didn't learn anything from this essay. And I said, oh, he's at Harvard. And the student said, oh, well, maybe I should listen again. And I didn't hear properly. And it's funny, and that essay often gets like, not that Michigan isn't a great school, it's a fantastic school, and it's really, really hard to get into, but it is easier than Harvard by a fair amount. And a lot of times, like, people rarely guess higher than Michigan for like where this kid would have gone to school. And he was a straightforward applicant. There was nothing, unique or special circumstance about him. And people, again, are often very, very surprised. And the idea is that and it was also one of the reasons I use it is because the student was a really, just a really like kind of serious, stiff kid who always just had his eyes on the prize and was working really hard to get there, and it was sort of like, almost like, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. And when you get to the essay, that's bad. You don't want to just be told what to do, because first of all, everyone would look the same, and that's the problem. That's what I'm trying to help people avoid. And again, colleges are looking for all different kinds of kids. They want kids who are witty, they want kids who are serious, they want kids who care about, who say, family is really important, they want kids who say their art is really important. I mean, there really is no value judgment, essentially, as long as you're not saying anything that's off color or that's, again, as I said before, too honest maybe about yourself. The key is really writing about something about you in a way that's thoughtful and reflective, and that also sometimes means writing about something that you would think in your head is not very positive, as long as it's something that's in the past and you've kind of moved on from it. So for instance, sometimes students will write about a change in themselves over time, and there are changes that are somewhat natural and expected as students move from certainly middle school throughout high school or younger to kind of older. A common one that people will sometimes write about is a transition from being very shy and sort of not a follower, but sort of being told what to do, and then kind of coming out of their shell for some reason or another, through an experience or some other thing, and kind of changing and becoming more about pursuing what they want and kind of realizing that they have a voice for themselves, or putting themselves out there in a group when they're with other kids or with older people or whatever. And we do talk about that former self who was really shy and just kind of didn't put themselves out there and really did miss out on opportunities. And you want to reflect on that and show that you can see yourself for what you are. But the key is that the main part of the essay, for instance, would focus on who you are today. And that's a different person than then. So you might spend just a handful of sentences about the old you, but then move into the transition to the you of today, because that's what colleges are getting, and that is the positive, more positive reflection of you. But raising an issue that's quote unquote negative, as long as, and again, there's not everything that would be appropriate, but raising something that kind of was negative about you, so to speak, is a really insightful thing as long as you can reflect on it honestly. And they do want to hear it from you. So you should be saying, I missed out on opportunities as a result, and say and give yourself that sort of critical reflection, and then move on and talk about, again, the you of today. We don't want to hear about why you want to be a doctor. We don't want to hear about, how much you love volunteering at the nursing home, and it's essentially just a regurgitation, but longer, of your resume, like a description on a resume. And we also don't want to hear things that sound like an English essay where you kind of make a point about yourself and then give 3 examples and then conclude. You really want to tell a story that would be engaging if I picked up a magazine or if I was sitting across from you and just listening. One of the things also is don't be so formal in your language. So for instance, you want to make sure that you use contractions. I know English teachers are going to slap me on the wrist, but that's not how we speak, right? We don't speak so formally. If I was talking to you, if you transcribe this speech that I'm giving to you, you would see that I rarely I'm not using contractions when they're available to me. So you want it to sound like you're speaking. Now, where does this come in for Asian students in particular? Asian students tend to write about, most commonly I would say, kind of Eastern-Western culture clashes, which can actually sometimes be very good essays if they're done properly, but most students will write them very generically without the real sort of depth in terms of their own personality. And that's something that's really, really important. So you can do that, but they also will often write about a musical experience, something with their being not so great at the beginning and then getting really great, and then, wow, isn't that fabulous? I put in all that hard work and now I'm first chair, and my parents, pushed me, and I'm glad they did, because here I am. You'll see like literally thousands of those essays. You're also going to see things just about why people like math and science. They like finding an answer for something, and they like knowing that they can figure it out no matter how hard it is. Again, nice, but not going to get us there. And so I talked about the things that you kind of want to do, because I think the things that you don't want to do are a lot of the sort of knee-jerk reactions and would counter what I said before. And so you really want to, it all goes back to kind of really thinking about who you are. And even though parents may have helped shape students, and of course all of our parents help shape who we are, you really want to get at what's important to you. And that may or may not be aligned with what your parents have kind of moved you towards. But think about what you love, think about what's important to you, think about how you've changed over time, and then really dig deep. So if you're writing about something, I always tell people, you've got to make sure that if someone reading it who didn't know you picked it up, they would know it was you and not your best friend. And there has to be things about your own personal experience, no matter how similar you are to your best friend. There are things about your own personal experience that are just different from everybody else. And that is what makes you unique. And so when your essay unique, when you hear people and admissions officers talking about standing out and the hook and the unique, all they're saying to you, they're just saying it in a very sort of PR kind of way, all they're saying to you is truly be yourself. But then when they say that, people sitting in the audience are like, well, what does that mean? But you're judging me while I'm being myself. So you are being yourself, but obviously on your best behavior somewhat, when you write your essay. And so don't go the generic route. Don't stop at the generic place. Dig deep. Again, make it so that if I took your name off and somebody read it who knew you and your best friend, they would know which one was which. And that should be both your voice and the examples that you bring and the details that you include, as well as the more general things that will make it more human and make me, who comes from a different background than you, connect on whatever issue you're talking about, even if it's something that's totally foreign to me, whether it's cultural or personal, or anything like that. So just to recap about the kinds of things that you want to focus on and make sure that you really pay attention to, particularly as an Asian applicant, but in truth for all applicants, is that you want to make sure that you're focusing on the curriculum and you're taking the strongest classes possible based on your strengths and interests. Don't freak out if you're an Asian kid and you're like, I'm actually bad at math. What do I do? It's okay. Take the highest course you can, do really, really well in it, and do well in everything else too. You also want to do well in your classes, and that's sort of a continuation of what I've said. You want to make sure that you're involved in extracurricular activities that are all, if you love to play the violin or cello, continue, but you want to do more than that. If you love science research, that's fine, but you need to do other things, because again, we're going to see just a lot of that. And it's going to be hard to distinguish yourself just if that's sort of what you focus on. In terms of academic interest, the pre-med stuff, the science stuff, it's okay, but again, you're going to have to dig pretty deep to be able to distinguish yourself in terms of why this is what you're doing, aside from the fact that it just is what people do, that you know and you've surrounded yourself by. Extracurricularly, those are kind of the pieces. Standardized test-wise, you do as well as you can, period. You want to get them as high as possible so they're a non-issue at whatever level you're doing. And then with the essay, again, just sort of be yourself, give an honest voice. You don't want it to seem like you're performing, but you can't make it seem like you're performing for them when you write. And so get somebody to read it who really has a clear understanding of that. I want to say a few words about the college fair, and then I'll also open the floor to answer some questions more specifically. So we have a college fair going on. Our company, Expert Admissions, has a table, so if you have other questions that we can't take here, please feel free to come by and ask us questions. We have a lot of staff members here today who can help you. There are other colleges and other companies there. When you visit the colleges, you want to make the most of the time you have here. You've got great representatives who have a ton of information to give you. So even if you haven't heard of a school, walk up and ask them about themselves, find out a little bit about their programs. Just because you haven't heard of somewhere doesn't mean it's not an excellent place. A lot of students haven't heard of some of the top places in particular fields, or even generally. I'm always surprised at places students haven't heard of that are objectively, top level schools. So go and ask questions, no matter the school. When you ask questions, be sure to ask specific questions. So if you're interested in a particular area, ask them about the opportunities that they have, especially maybe for freshmen coming in. Ask them about maybe what they think the strengths of their school are. Do they have programs or opportunities that they think set them apart? And maybe ask them the kind of students that they tend to attract. And then of course, if they might have some questions back for you, and if they have a card or anything, make sure that you sign in and so that they can get back in touch with you. But do go around and visit all different kinds of places. Do ask thoughtful questions and make sure you give them your information so that they can follow up in the future. I'm going to open up the floor for questions now. If anybody has anything, I can always repeat the question and then I would be happy to answer. Just don't get so specific, like, I'm taking this class and what to do, because that's hard for other people to learn from. But any questions about the application process or anything like that? Yes?
Hi, I have a 10th grade son, and we have difficulty to how to define the goal and what he's going to do in the future, or how we select the target at the university college to apply. So do you have any advice?
Sure, but he is a 10th grader, and the question is how to kind of figure out the end goal, both in terms of what he wants to do and where he wants to apply, like kind of what level would he be at. So in 10th grade, you have a little bit of a sense, but there's still a lot to be determined. And for those students who are in 10th grade or 9th grade currently, the SAT will be changing for you. And so this is a big question for students of this age and younger. So first, one thing you want to think about is, are you going to go for that new SAT that's not as well known, or the existing ACT? Because scores are going to create some kind of boundary around anybody. So it's hard for me now to tell you right now that you can kind of figure out where. But I would say if you keep your eye on the goal that I mentioned earlier, which is strongest classes possible, highest grades you can within reason. And one thing I will say also, because every year I have a few students who have to do this, is that there's a disciplinary box on the application that asks if you've had any kind of disciplinary action. And I do have every year students who have to check it because they get into formal trouble for cheating. There's a tremendous amount of pressure on all high school students. There's an even, I think, greater pressure, quite honestly, on Asian students, both internally and externally. And be smart about working hard. And if you're not prepared for something, just take the bad grade once and learn from it and move on. I have a student this year who's Asian, who has straight A's, almost perfect scores, and got an F on a paper because he didn't cite properly. He took something from the internet, didn't cite it, the teacher caught it, and while he wasn't suspended, he was given a 0 on this paper, and he has a C- in this econ class, and straight A's otherwise. So even though he doesn't have to check the box, we have to explain why in the world there's a C- when everything else is A's. And academic dishonesty is pretty much like you're dead in the water at most places that are higher level. And his list has to be pretty much adjusted and expanded so significantly, because this one thing, literally at places where he would have had a really good shot, he's out once they see it. The C- itself, just in and of itself, and when they see the reason. So I mention this because every year I have students who have checked the box or not, but have to report something, and it will drastically change your options, like in a split second. So I encourage you to work hard. I'm saying to try and get, more A's than B's in whatever classes make sense, but don't do something short-sighted that will hurt you in the long term. And so I know there's a lot of pressure out there, but keep your head on straight and just work hard and do the best you can. It all works out in the end. So the thing that I was saying is that I think it's hard now to know. Scores will definitely give you some initial sense because you'll know where they start knocking you out. But then let's just even say you get good scores. then it becomes more an issue of fit. And this is where your college counselor or some college counselor can come into play, which is to help you figure out, well, what is the difference between Harvard and Yale? Like, they actually numerically take the same students, but they're such different places if you really know them. And they're looking for really different things in applicants. Even if you look at Emory and Vanderbilt, two places, medium-sized, southern, high level, makes sense. So if your essays have to be there. It can't just be that you pick the school because it's on US News and World Report at this number or higher. You are not going to get in so many places, you'll see at least at the higher level, if that's how you pick and you really don't know the schools and it's not shown in a discrete way in the supplements. Other questions? Yes?
Hi, I'm a reporter for Applicants, newspaper, and I have a question about interview. Like, do you think interview is an important part of college application? And if that's the case, how do you think Asian kids can stand out?
Sure. The question is about interviews, whether they're important, and if so, how they stand out. So, in most instances, not all, but in most, the college interview isn't going to make a measurable difference in the outcome of the decision. If it's offered at any school that you apply to, you should do it, unless you're really, really awful at interviews and talking to adults, in which case you truly do sit it out. But you generally say you do it to be a good applicant. But having a fantastic interview, but a transcript and test scores or test scores that are kind of off, really off, is not going to make a difference the way it would in a job interview. It would make all the difference. So it's pretty different in that respect. There are some exceptions. MIT cares tremendously about the interview. Hamilton College cares tremendously about the interview. Muhlenberg College cares tremendously about the interview. Bowdoin does. I mean, there are a lot of, not a lot. I don't even think I could get 10. But there are schools that do care. Almost all do not. Not all of them offer it. And I think for Asian students, the real key is ideally to kind of really be able to speak up and to, have that voice and not sort of just be the kind of more, it's not robotic, it looks robotic on paper, but it seems just a little bit more flat in person. I really want to hear in the application and the interview, why? Why do you love science? Why are you sitting in that first chair? Not because you're good at it and because you're perseverant and you work hard at things you care about. We kind of assume that of everybody who's able to apply to these schools. If that wasn't true, to a fair degree at least, you couldn't be there. So those are things we sort of say, as hard as they are to accomplish and achieve, if you didn't have that, we wouldn't be talking. So you've got to take it past that. And so the why, and to be able to say that from a place within is really, really important. And I think it is the case that often we see more of this sort of flat response from students, kind of thinking it might be a little bit more, a good job interview wouldn't go like that either, quite frankly, but it would take you a little bit farther at least, because it might be based more on very specific qualifications. So I think kind of feeling comfortable to let your personality come through when talking to an adult, and even for these purposes, is important. And then I don't know if you want me to take a few more questions or if we should stop. Okay, I'm sorry, that's as much time as we have. As I said before, we have a table in the college fair, so come by. And then I and an associate of mine are doing some one-on-one counseling, so we might see you also one-on-one. Thank you very much.